good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We know we've got a few Aussies and we've also got a few Americans. And welcome to this review, or what we could call a summary of the S500. Well, it finally came out in May 2021. We finally saw it. Here it is. We have it in our hands here in Australia, and you can purchase this at the Coach 8 website and also the IICRC's website. But we were able to bring this over to Australia for the Australians and New Zealanders at a good price to be able to purchase this. Finally here, and the consensus body 2018 got together and we were able to finally release this. And it's so exciting to be able to go through this review of this S500 with you guys and girls. So there's a little bit of a disclaimer that I do have to put out there at the start, is that this content in this presentation was developed by myself. It's not part of the IICRC. It wasn't part of the consensus body at all. And this information is a summary of changes that were made available. The entire document should be read in its entirety and in its full context for a full understanding. That's just a little bit of a presentation disclaimer there. To really understand what this document is, you do need to read all sections of this, okay? So starting off with, and talking about the structural changes that we can see within the document, immediately when we feel this document, it's lighter. Well, the reference guide has been removed, and that's why it now says standard for professional water damage restoration. So the reference guide was removed from this document, and any relevant information that we thought as a CB needed to be brought over into the standard has been undertaken. And so you will see that the actual document itself is a little bit thicker in regards to standards language, which is important to mention. But yeah, the reference guide has been removed. There was 15 added new terms and definitions within this, which is really something that you need to understand. And also the appendix in the back of this has been put in. Now the appendix has got some excellent reading material within this, and I would really encourage you to read the appendices. Now we have the Appendix A, which is the assembly and material table. You can see that there, and then we have the Appendix B, which is the examples of dehumidification formulas approximating minimum for humidity control. I think that really needs to remember when we start looking at these dehumidification formulas at the back, they are the approximating of minimum humidity control. And you'll notice here actually in the back of this now that there is the metric conversions. Finally, we have a printed version of the metric conversions. So we have the imperial as well as the metric, and we have the metric and imperial conversions for the detailed refrigerant as well as the detailed desiccant dehumidification, which is really exciting. And then you have the Appendix C, and that's the carpet disengagement and re-engagement for drying. That's on the last couple of pages of the document. That there has got some great information. If you're ever going to do a toolbox meeting and you wanted something to go through with your technicians before they head out into the field, that couple of pages there has got some excellent information for you guys to be able to go through with your technicians in regards to carpet disengagement. I'd really encourage you to read that bit. Just keep in mind that the appendixes, they are not part of the standard care of language, okay? Now, Section 12, in this document, it used to be specialised experts. Well, that's been totally removed now. Any language that was in specialised experts, it has been just weaved through the document to all different sections, you're going to see a lot more language in regards to specialised experts within some of these sections, but that has been removed. All right, so what we're going to do this morning is just go through these sections one by one, and some of them really are going to be fairly quick, and it'll look like I'm trying to speed through it, but there's actually not that much in some of these sections. And if you have had a look at the document, some of these sections are only like a paragraph long, maybe a couple of paragraphs or a sentence. They're quite small. So we're going to be going through some of the major changes that I could see within the document, and starting off with section 1. I just want to move my little bit of a bar here. All right, there we go. All right, so section 1, principles of water damage restoration. Well, in the initial inspection, this is quite a small section, but the initial inspection, 1.2.2.1, there was a substantive change, and it adds the restorer should establish drying goals that would be expected to inhibit microbial growth and return materials to an acceptable moisture level or content. So that was a substantive change within that sentence there, that the restorer should establish drying goals. Now, that drying goals and dry standard, you see how it refers to 10.6.6, and that is on drying standards and drying goals. That is an area that I'd encourage you to have a look at and try and understand a little bit more. And we'll have a look at it later on when we go to section 10. But it is emphasised in this edition that the dry standard is only one component of establishing a dry goal. So that has been separated. So 10.6.6 is something that if you want to note down, there's something you might want to have a look at later on. But it has got some very good information in regards to 10.6.6. Section 2, microbiology of water damage. Well, it did add some new standard of care language in there, but it's very common to us as restorers, and it's in 2.1 in the introduction. It says that mitigation following water damage events should begin as soon as safely possible. So that was that change that was put into it. A very small change, but you know, for us in the restoration industry, we know that we should be getting there as fast as possible. So that mitigation following water damage events should begin as safely as possible. When we have a look at section 3, health effects from exposure to microbial contamination in water damaged buildings, another very small section within the document. There was no trigger language added into this at all. No new trigger language, I should say. Any relevant information that was in the reference guide was brought out of the reference guide, and it was under sewerage and health. There was a new component put into that section 3, and also secondary fungal contamination. You'll see that there's some information in regards to that in section 3. Section 4, building and material science, another small section within the document. There was a couple of recommended added to this, even though recommend, and you could say that it has been elevated. To be honest, you could say it has been elevated. It has been put into a recommend, and it is a trigger word that we do need to consider. It's the standards definition on recommend is it's a practice or a procedure that is advised or suggested, but it's not a component of that accepted standard of care. So it's still something we do need to consider. It says it is recommended that restorers understand the construction of structure, systems, and contents. And then it also goes on to say that since all components of a building are interrelated, it is recommended that restorers attempt to discern the intent of the building's design or construction. So it's now recommended, it's been that trigger word is there for the restorer, that it's recommended that they do understand the construction of a structure, and also it's recommended to discern the intent of the building's design. So that section 4 is something that I would really recommend that you do go through with your technicians with that new verbiage put in there. Section 5, well, that didn't change at all. You know, that's psychrometry and drying technology, and I don't think that we'll probably ever see that change. To be honest, there was no changes within it. In that, the restorer is asked to understand how to manage the psychrometric properties of the environment. He also is to understand the effect of moisture movement through different materials, and also he should understand how to promote surface evaporation from the materials. And psychrometry you'll see throughout the document, but that section 5 has had no new verbiage. Section 6, equipment, instruments and tools. Well, that had some revised verbiage in relation to the safety information for equipment. And in the S500, we have taken out anything that was required that in regards to safety and health, and pushing it onto the restorer or the user to make sure that they are going to the manufacturer's safety guidelines and following what they say. It now says equipment, instruments, tools, and their use shall conform to safety and inspection requirements of local, state, provincial, or federal laws. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, we should be doing that. That is a definite trigger word right there, that shall. It then goes on to say that restorers should follow the manufacturer's safety guidelines, operation instructions, and maintenance programs where applicable. So we're getting the user now to make sure that they are following the manufacturer's safety guidelines, and not just giving our technicians a piece of equipment and say, see you later. We need to be able to make sure that they're understanding those safety guidelines within those new pieces of equipment. Section 7, antimicrobial biocide technology. There was some language removed within this section here, and it was simplified down. So it was also pushing the user to make sure that they're following the label directions. So it's not up to the S500 to be putting that in there or any of our standards. It's for the user to make sure that they're following the label directions. So, because everything on that product label is there for the user, and that's where they should be going for any type of material. There was an addition put into it saying that it is recommended that the restorer evaluate whether antimicrobial biocide application is appropriate. I think sometimes we get a little bit loose with our chemical spraying in some of our jobs. It's important, I think, just to go through that something that was retained within the document, and it's an important language. And it says, not all water intrusions warrant the use of antimicrobials. That was left in there. And secondly, it says when there is a category 1 water intrusion that has not changed in its category, the use of antimicrobials is generally not warranted. So I think that's important to sort of mention in this summary today. It was left in there, and I think it's important to make sure that not everything needs to have a biocide applications. Section 8, safety and health. Well, there was a couple of small revisions in regards to that, and it was more into the US compliance for OSHA. Okay, so just for the guys in the US, there was some revisions there that I'd ask you to have a look at in regards to OSHA. What's not new is restoration firms shall comply with applicable sections of both the OSHA general industry standards and the construction industry standards. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, we have these construction industry standards, we shall comply with them. And added to that subsection of, there's been 2 new specific items in regards to health and safety. One of them is hazard and risk assessments. They should be being done, especially in the OSHA regulations. Here in Australia, workplace health and safety, a hazard and risk assessment is something that should be being done. Secondly, that's been put into there, you'll see a new list item about respiratory silica dust. So for the first time in a document from the IICRC standards point of view, there is respiratory silica dust in there now, because it is becoming a very big safety and health problem for many people out in the field, especially restorers. We may be grinding a floor down to be able to remove glue, for example. We may be cutting into some masonry walls and that for drying. So we do need to consider this respiratory silica dust and its hazards. So keep that in mind. You'll also see through this document more verbiage in regards to HEPA filtration, making sure that our vacuum cleaners are HEPA filtered, AFDs. There has been some changes in regards to AFDs as well. We'll talk about that soon. So on that real safety component for HEPA filtration is in this document. Section 9, Administrative Procedures, Project Documentation and Risk Management. Not too many changes, but there was some significant updates in regards to a couple of subsections. And the subsections I wanted to just talk to you about at the moment was subsection 9.2.4. And it's on the required documentation that a restorer should have within their company when they're going out to a project. This is something that I would, if there was another area that I'd say probably go out and read a little bit more on. And this area here, you could sit down with your administration staff, the project managers that are going out on site, and just making sure that you do have the information that's in this subsection 9.2.4. It had some significant updates, and 3 new items were put into it for our documentation. One is documents and records relevant to validating the drying process and verification of the completion criteria. The second one is documentation related to project limitations, complexities, complications, or conflicts. Or you may have heard LCCC. Those LCCCs are something that we do need to make sure, which we'll be looking at very soon within another section, that if they have come up in those projects, that there is documented evidence of that and everyone is in agreement. Certifications of the completion or these other documents communicating that the completion criteria has been met is a new list item that's been put into there. So that is an area, and the list is quite long. So I would really encourage you to have a look at that if you're taking notes right now. If you have a look at the next subsection of 9.2.5, it's on the recommended documentation. And there is some great documentation that we should have, and that is recommended that we should have within our documents when we go out to a project. Check it out with your company and just see if you're aligning with how the S500 has set that out for us as restoration firms. Section 10, Inspections, Preliminary Determinations and Pre-Restoration Evaluations. Well, there was a substantive change within the definition of Category 3. Small one, but it is there. And you know, I know that there is a lot of talk going around about the whole category definitions. And I believe that that will be in the next review when that occurs in the next consensus body when they join. And there is a lot of discussion about Category 3 water specifically. But there is a change. It does say there that sewage, waste line backflows that originate from beyond any trap, regardless of visible content or color. So it used to say there from beyond the trap, but now it's from beyond any trap within our toilets. There was another change at the bottom there. It says Category 3 water can carry trace levels of regulated or hazardous materials. So there's an allowance there now for that to carry some trace of regulated hazardous materials. Now, if there is that hazardous or regulated material within that waste, that takes precedence. That regulated hazardous material takes precedence, and you need to deal with that first. And so there was just a couple of changes within this category here, and it needs to be mentioned. And I would encourage you to go and just read that completely in context, that whole section that we're talking about there. Later on in section 10 is 10.6.6 on dry standards and drying goals. It says dry standards are a reasonable approximation of the moisture level or moisture content of materials prior to a water intrusion. This is the new bit, a little bit of added verbiage. It says restorers may use dry standards to determine the areas affected by a water intrusion. An acceptable method to establish a dry standard is to evaluate the moisture level or moisture content of similar materials in unaffected areas. Okay. Now it says here that drying goals are a target moisture level or moisture content of materials established by the restorer. And the individuals establishing the drying goals should be qualified by experience and training in the use and limitations of moisture meters. That component was left in there. We'll talk about that a little bit more about the moisture meter component. But the drying goal, it's not just based on the dry standard. There is now a list that of recommended considerations for you to be able to achieve that drying goal. And the dry standard is part of it. We can see it here in 10.6.6. It says here that when establishing a drying goal to return a structure or system and contents to an acceptable condition, it is recommended that the restorer considers these. The agreed upon scope. Notice the dry standard is in there now. Project complexities, assembled compositions, expected conditions, prevailing or seasonal weather. That's interesting. Historical data for the region. Building assembly installations and published resources. Notice we now have the Australian Timber Flooring Association resources in there. There's a reason for that. ATFA have some great information in regards to timber floors and dry standards within different types of timbers. And so that has been put in there. So for you to be able to get these dry goals within a structure, the dry standard is now a component of that. Along with those considerations, it is recommended that the drying goal be within 10% of the dry standard. Notice it says where applicable. It's not all the time, it's where applicable. So these here as a nice list to be able to go through with your technicians. I'll just skip back a slide here. Notice in the dry standards and drying goals, it says here the reasonable approximation of the moisture level or moisture content. That's added a little bit of added verbiage in there. It used to not have moisture level or moisture content. And that now is really emphasizing the separation between the meters, the invasive and the non-invasive meters. So we'll see that a little bit later on, and you'll see that completely through the sections, this moisture level and now a moisture content, two separate things. In 10.6.7, the preliminary determination. If the preliminary determination is that the water is category 1, then the restorer can proceed without contamination controls. Example, erecting containment barriers and establishing pressure differentials. In that example there used to be initial cleaning. The initial cleaning has now been removed out of those examples, as in if you're in a category 1 water loss. That's just a slight change there within that little component. In 10.6.8, performing the initial moisture inspection. The restorer should be trained in the proper use and application of the meter in accordance with manufacturer literature and have an understanding of the intended use, limitations, and proper operation of the device. So that was elevated in language in regards to that, and the restorer should be trained in the provision and the use of a moisture meter. I think some of us are probably guilty of providing technicians a moisture meter, but not really going through the moisture meter with them, or making sure that the actual technician is understanding the operating instructions. So it's important for us to understand from now on is that these moisture meters, they're all different. Doesn't matter if you're using a Delmoist or a Tramex or a Protometer or whatever you're using out there, a Fleur or Trotec, all of these meters are different. And so our technicians really have to be able to understand how to use those meters. Section 11, limitations, complexities, complications, and conflicts. I think this area, this section doesn't really get utilized a lot within our companies. And we're going to come up against, in our projects, these LCCCs. And so we are all going to be faced with project conditions that will present challenges. And these challenges can produce limitations, complexities, complications, or conflicts. What we're asked to in this section is that the restorer should have an understanding of these issues and communicate them to the appropriate parties. And I would encourage you, there was no changes within this section, and I would encourage you to go through that section with your legal team if you do have one, or your administration team. Section 12. Well, Section 12 was fairly ripped apart and then rearranged, and there's been a lot of changes within Section 12. And it had a complete flow change in regards to the order of works within Section 12. It used to be Section 13. Remember, Section 12 was specialised experts. That's now been removed. This was formerly 13. It's now Section 12. And what the CB has come up with is this flow chart that you can see on your screen here. And this depicts a flowing of a job. If it was category 1, we'll go down the right-hand side there. If we've got a category 2 or 3, we're going to head over to the left. And the way that the section is being written is in this flow. Now, we know that all these jobs don't typically go in those orders. But this is a really good starting point for you to understand. And if I was going to bring out another point to remember, is this Section 12 is something that you're going to be finding a lot of information in. Don't even bother going back to the 2015 edition and try and match them up, because they've been totally rearranged from page to page and been put in this nice flow now. You'll notice here within this section a lot more information or referencing to the specialised experts. Okay, so because of the category 2 and category 3 restoration, remediation, assessments, evaluations, all of these now have definitions within the definition page, and I'd encourage you to read that. 12.3.10.4, it's on the post-remediation, evaluation, and verification. It says there that at the completion of the remediation process of a category 2 or a category 3 project, a post-remediation evaluation should be conducted. Now, these have been separated, and I'd encourage you to have a look at the definitions of these. What is a post-remediation evaluation, for example? It should be conducted. So the restorer is asked to, there's trigger language there, to make sure that if at the completion of it, this post-remediation evaluation, or this what we might call as a PRE, it should be conducted. The post-remediation evaluation should include, at a minimum, visible free of dust, debris, and malodors. The evaluation can be performed by a competent restoration professional. However, where any of the elevated risk factors in the following list are present, it is recommended that an independent IEP, as indoor environmental professionals, conduct a PRV, that post-remediation verification. And it provides these lists. And we have occupants of high risk, so occupants of high risk, a public health issue, or a likelihood of adverse health effects on workers or occupants. So at this stage of a category 2 or 3, if we have these persons involved in the claim, occupants of high risk, public health risk, or a likelihood of adverse health effects, then it is recommended that we have an independent IEP. This pre-remediation assessment is performed and a category 3 was determined. So in 12.3.10.4, it goes on to say this about a post-remediation evaluation and a verification. It says where the following elevated risk factors are present on a category 3 project, however, so we're on a category 3, an IEP should be retained. All right. And it says there that we've got these occupants of high risk individuals or a public health issue, and we're at the post-remediation evaluation. We're right at the very end. We should be having a IEPD, specifically on a category 3. In 12.4.2, in controlling humidity, it's now just added verbiage there with stabilisation. So controlling humidity and stabilisation, that is important. And in that bit there is a little bit of added verbiage with the word temperature. Humidity and temperatures within the structure should be controlled as soon as practical to minimise moisture migration, potential secondary damage, and microbial amplification. So it's not just looking after the humidity within the environment. This stabilisation is making sure that we are controlling the humidity as well as temperatures in the air and on surfaces. The restorer is asked to do that. It also, in this subsection here, it references back to the appendix. And in the appendix, it references back to the dehumidification section there, Appendix B. So that is a very important point that I want to bring out, is this initial humidity control. It does reference over to the dehumidification humidity control within Appendix B. Section 12.4.5, it says under the initial cleaning of Category 1 water, it says prior to implementing the restorative drying effort, this is when you've got rapid air movement, restorers should evaluate, then clean materials within the work area. So this is something that's not new to those that have been using this document since the 4th edition. And it says where necessary, restorers should clean visible debris. Okay. This is what was added though. This is something that needs to, I believe, is a fairly important change within this section in regards to air filtration devices. It says where cleaning cannot sufficiently remove soil or particulates, or there are high risk occupants, it is recommended restorers install one or more AFD. So it used to read it can, the restorer can put one in. It's now been elevated up into a recommended, and that's very important. So if you are going on to these projects and you cannot sufficiently remove soils, or there's a high risk occupant, it's recommended that you install one. And in 12.5.3, under controlling airflow, so still in that controlling airflow component, it says restorers should employ cleaning methods that minimize aerosolizing of particulates. Where cleaning cannot sufficiently remove soil or particulates, and this is a new line, when airflow is directed through institutional spaces or there are high-risk occupants, it is recommended the restorers install one or more air filtration devices. So this is on that controlling airflow subsection. The other one before was about the initial cleaning phase, Now we're into controlling airflow. And interestingly, we've put in there institutional spaces. Maybe you've got a ceiling underneath the floor. You might have air conditioning ducting going in through this institutional space. It's an area that is not livable. If you're putting airflow into that, we all know that positive air pressure will push contaminants into another uncontaminated area if that's what's up there. We are asked to, it's now recommended, okay, not a shorter shell, but it has been increased and elevated within its language. It is recommended the restorer install one or more air filtration devices. In subsection 12.5.6, ongoing inspections and monitoring. It says psychrometric conditions and moisture level or content measurements should be recorded at least daily. That's not new. I thought we better keep that in there for today's presentation. We should be doing it daily. The primary indicators related to dehumidifier performance are the ongoing control of the drying environment and a resultant reduction of material, moisture level, or moisture content. So there's that moisture level and moisture content again. And that component is new verbiage. The psychrometric conditions are very important. We all know that. But the restorer also needs to consider the materials and confirm that they are being dried and the right conditions are being accomplished by the restorer. In this document or the previous document, there was no mention about having a grain depression. Okay, so that's not something that we're relying on, a grain depression within our dehumidifiers. The primary indicators related to a dehumidifier performance are the ongoing control of the drying environment and a resultant reduction within the moisture content. To be able to measure this correctly and have accurate readings, the restorer should use the same meter throughout a project. This is in subsection 12.5.6. If you were not aware of it, it's right there for us. To be able to measure this correctly and have accurate readings, the restorer should use the same meter throughout a project or establish an in-house method to verify that the meters used are within a reasonable tolerance of each other. It's an interesting point there. It also says now, because differences in calibration occur from one instrument to another, restorers should use the same meter throughout a project or establish an in-house method to verify the meters are within a reasonable tolerance of each other. Okay, so using that same meter is asked by the user throughout those projects. Section 12 had a lot of information in it, a lot of changes, and I'd encourage you to really go through Section 12. Section 13, heating and ventilation, and this Section 12 was updated to be consistent with the current IICRC S500. Now, keep in mind that the S500 right now is going through a fairly major review. And the S500, it may come out sometime in 22, by the looks, but I don't believe it'll be this year. If it does, it'll be amazing. But this is updated information from that document within to brew it over into the S500. The Category 1 water, so there's a couple of changes there. Category 1 water should be drained or vacuumed thoroughly from HVAC ductwork and systems. Mechanical and other system components should be evaluated and cleaned by appropriately qualified contractors as necessary, following appropriate industry standards and guidelines. And you'll see there's some examples of the industry standards and guidelines. And just make sure that when you are following any of those guidelines, that it's the current guidelines, okay? 13.1, the relationship between the building and its HVAC system. So this was something that was brought over into this document. It says materially interested parties should be advised of known conditions that place the future integrity of the building at risk. And this is an important point. It says these systems can create air pressure differentials inside of the structure which should be considered during restoration projects. I think that's important. These systems, these HVAC systems, if they are being used within our restoration projects, they can create air pressure differentials. So we do need to consider that, and that's why we would go back and follow the appropriate industry standard and guidelines, maybe bring in a specialized expert to assist us, because not all of us are mechanical engineers. So this section here on contents, let me just move this out of the way. All right, so section 14, contents, evaluation and restoration. This did have some significant changes within section 14. And one of them I just want to bring out was the timing of when inventory of contents was changed. And it was actually downgraded a touch. It used to be a should, now it's a recommend. Let's have a look at that. The intention of doing that, though, was to allow different company workflows. You might have different project considerations, might be different timeframes throughout the project, and that possibility of doing that inventory at the start may not be possible. So it's been downgraded from a should to a recommend. It says it is recommended contents be inventoried and documented before being removed from the building. So it's now recommended. It used to be a should. However, it's still important. It says an inventory of the contents to be removed from the building should be performed. That may include, but is not limited to, the following information. It is recommended that the inventory be performed prior to removal of contents from the building and a chain of custody be maintained. I think the restorers out there all know how to do a chain of custody if you've been doing mold remediation, for example. So that has just been downgraded a touch just to allow for different companies' workflow. It's recommended that you do it, but it's still a should. You should still perform a contents inventory at some stage through that. Various updates to specific contents categories. Section 14 is a brilliant section, guys. It's so much information in section 14 in regards to contents remediation. If you are involved in contents inventories, remediation, storage, this section here is something that I would really ask you to read. There's some very good updates in regards to specific contents categories on the required methods of cleaning, the procedures and recommendations, information that was in the reference guide. In the reference guide, there was a lot of very good information that's been brought over into section 14. And some of that is in regards to specific handling recommendations on some of these bigger items, and how to manage and go with procedures on some of these specific handling of these specific contents. For example, snooker tables and pianos, armory, firearms. Even though it was there before, there's just been some slight changes and upgrades from the reference guide brought into that. So have a good read of that. Section 15. Large or catastrophic restoration projects. It had some moderate language updates, not too much, to be honest with this. What I would like to bring out is that there is a new standard in development, and that standard is the S550. It will be an S550, but it is the 550. Currently, it's being written. And that 550 is on commercial and large loss water damage. If you are in large loss, you will want to be involved with the review of that when that comes out. I would highly encourage any of you that are involved in large loss to, when that comes out for review, for a peer review, because remember, every standard comes out for a peer review, that is the one you want to have a look at. It is going to be edition 1, a lot of information, some very good guys on that, mechanical engineers and structural engineers. There's guys on there that have been doing large loss for many years. that document we are all very excited about. So in section 15, there was some slight upgrades within the information. There was no new trigger language there. When we do look at large loss, though, there is 4 types of structures that I just want to bring out. We have commercial, industrial, institutional, and complex residential. Now, all 4 of them, their sizing and their intricacy are all different within the way they've been built, their complex building materials, their construction methods, their different types of HVAC systems. They've got different wiring. They've got gas lines, fire suppression lines. Some might have a 12 volt lines going through. In some areas, there could be a 24 volt. You've got your 3-phase lines, ductwork, different types of plumbing. All of these types of structures have different ways of being built, and you will start to see these LCCCs pop up within those large losses. So if you are involved in large loss, I would encourage you to have a look at section 15. It has some very good information in it, and also it provides a lot of questions for administration and for the persons that are going on site to ask, and also to consider when it comes to equipment purchasing. Maybe we don't have that much to be able to put into some of these large projects. We may have to reach outside of our company for someone else to give us a hand. There's some good information in section 15. Section 16, we're getting to the end now. And section 16, materials and assemblies. Now, this section here, I personally love. I really love section 16. It is on specific materials. It had updated information from the table that was in the previous stand. We had that in the reference guide. If you remember, we had the tables there with all the materials on cleaning after category 1, 2, and 3, and the restorability on it. It was a fantastic table. That table is being put into the appendixes here, okay? It's still in this here for us in this new document. Any trigger language, though, that was in that table has been brought over into this section 16 and it's been weaved through it. And a lot of trigger language in this section has been put in with a much better clarity on how you and I, as the restorer, can go out there and handle these specific materials with a lot more clarity. And honestly, there's some very, very good information within section 16. As an example, I've just put an example up here, 16.3.2, and it's on engineered wood. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, we have engineered wood. And it says engineered wood, example, plywood or OSB, should be checked for moisture migration. If it has occurred, restorers should determine if the engineered material needs to be removed due to progressive deterioration. Okay, so that's an important little point there. If structural wood or engineered wood substrates are damaged or deteriorated, it is recommended that a specialized expert be consulted prior to determining the appropriate repair. So it's recommended we get a specialized expert in. Now, I'd encourage you to have a look at the definition of a specialized expert within this new document. The definitions page is really good too, guys, all right? We haven't even got time to go into the definitions and today. It says, if category 2 or 3 water has migrated into the assembly, surface materials should be removed and substrate evaluated for drying, cleaning, and sanitizing prior to replacement. Some very clear language put there. If the category 2 water has migrated into the assembly, this engineered wood has gone into this assembly, and we can't clean it, we can't sanitize it, then the flooring above it should be removed. And it goes into vinyl, tiles, timber, stone, granite. Like, it's got all of these types of surface materials listed there in this section 16. I would really encourage you to have a look That's section 16. The appendix. So, as I said at the start, the appendix, it is not part of the standard of care language. And that needs to be considered when you are looking at the appendices. Appendix A is the assembly and materials table. That table has got some great information for you and I to go through and to consider, keeping in mind that it is not part of the standard of care, but it gives us some good guidance. Appendix B, the example dehumidification formulas approximating a minimum for humidity control. Remember, this is for humidity control. And that there we have the imperial and metric versions now of the detailed version of desiccants and refrigerants. So we have the standard as well in there. So we have the standard, and we have a couple of examples put in there as well so you can see it. Before I forget, there is if you have purchased this document, there is a line that I would like you to strike out. And it is on the detailed method of desiccant dehumidifiers on page 176. And at number 1 there, you'll see there's a second sentence there of divide the total cubic footage of the environment by 60 to determine the base CFM necessary for humidity control. That line there needs to be lined out. The IICRC have released there was a fault with that. It should not have been put in there. So if you do have that document, we'll send out some information in regards to that. That'll come through from the IICRC, but that does need to be striked out. Appendix C, and that's for the guys with the metric version. The guys in the US, yours is okay. Appendix C, the carpet disengagement and re-engagement for drying. It's a really good information there, as I said before, and I would encourage you to go through that with your technicians and have a really good read of it. It's a good toolbox meeting information. All right, well, that's the summary of the new S500 5th edition. That's it. We've gone through basically the biggest changes. And as I said to you, 10.6.6, something really want to get to have a look at. Section 14, if you're doing contents, I'd really encourage you to look through that. Section 12 had the biggest changes in it under that structural restoration page, that section. And I'm very happy that we could have you all on here today going through this. If you have any questions, I know that AML are recording all the questions, and if you do have any that you think of later on, please send them through to AML and they will post them to me so I can answer them for you. We thank you very much for coming on today. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all guys very soon. Stay safe out there.